My name is Sarah, and for 28 years I believed that love meant sacrifice. I believed that being a good daughter meant saying yes to everything, even when it slowly killed me inside. I believed that family came first, always, no matter the cost to my own dreams, my own happiness, my own sanity. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, I was the responsible one. While my younger brother Jake got to be the golden child who could do no wrong, I was the reliable daughter who cleaned up messes, who worked part-time jobs to help with family expenses, who gave up my college fund so Jake could go to his dream school. My parents, Linda and Dave, had this way of making their problems feel like emergencies that only I could solve. The pattern started when I was just 16. Dad had been laid off from the steel mill, and Mom's part-time job at the local diner wasn't enough to cover the mortgage. I remember sitting at our kitchen table, the yellow Formica surface sticky with years of family meals, as they explained how desperate things had become. Mom's eyes were red-rimmed, and she kept twisting her wedding ring around her finger, a nervous habit I had learned to associate with financial stress. "Sarah, honey, we hate to ask this of you," Mom had said, her voice barely above a whisper, "but you've been doing so well with your job at the grocery store. We're just wondering if you could help us out just this once, just until your father finds work again." I had been saving money from my job bagging groceries and stocking shelves, dreaming of buying my first car, maybe even saving for college. The coffee can under my bed held $347, money I had earned by working weekends and evenings while maintaining honor roll grades. But looking at my parents' faces, seeing the genuine fear and desperation there, I felt something shift inside me, a responsibility I hadn't asked for but couldn't ignore. "Of course," I had said, and I meant it. "We're family." That phrase would echo through the next 12 years of my life like a mantra, a justification for every sacrifice, every disappointment, every time I put my own needs last. We're family, family helps family, family comes first. Dad did find work again eventually. A job at a smaller plant with lower pay and fewer benefits, but work nonetheless. And for a few months, things seemed to stabilize, but the precedent had been set. I was the one who could be counted on. I was the one who would always say yes. I was the safety net that made everyone else feel secure enough to take risks, knowing that if they fell, I would catch them. Jake was only 14 when the pattern began, young enough that it seemed natural for me to take care of things. When he needed new cleats for soccer and money was tight, I bought them. When he wanted to go on the school trip to Washington, D.C., and my parents couldn't afford it, I covered the cost with money from my after-school job at the library. When he crashed his bike and needed stitches, and our insurance had a high deductible, I paid the medical bill. Each time my parents were grateful but also somehow expectant, as if my help was not a gift but an obligation. Jake, sweet and oblivious in the way that younger siblings can be, simply accepted these things as normal. Of course Sarah would help. Of course Sarah would make things work. That's just what Sarah did. By the time I graduated high school, I had given up on my college dreams entirely. Not because I couldn't get in. My grades were excellent, and I had several acceptance letters, but because I couldn't afford it. Every dollar I had earned over the years had gone to family emergencies, family needs, family wants that somehow became necessities when filtered through my parents' anxiety about money. Instead, I enrolled in community college part-time and took a full-time job at a local insurance office. The work was mind-numbing, filing claims, answering phones, dealing with frustrated customers. But it paid well enough for me to move into a tiny apartment above Mrs. Henderson's garage and still have money left over to help my family when needed. And they needed help often. Dad's new job came with irregular hours and unpredictable pay. Some weeks he worked overtime and brought home decent money. Other weeks, when orders were slow, he barely worked at all. Mom had developed a chronic back condition that made it difficult for her to work consistently. The medical bills piled up, and with their inconsistent income, they were always one emergency away from disaster. I became their disaster prevention plan. When the washing machine broke down, they called me. When the car needed new tires, they called me. When the heating bill was higher than expected during a particularly harsh winter, they called me. Each request came with apologies, promises that it was temporary, assurances that they would pay me back as soon as things improved. But things never seemed to improve for long. Just when it looked like they might be getting ahead, something else would happen. The roof would start leaking, the refrigerator would die, Dad would throw out his back and miss a week of work, and I would open my wallet again and again, because that's what family did. Meanwhile, Jake was thriving. He had grown into a charismatic teenager, popular at school, talented at sports, bright enough to earn good grades without much effort. My parents doted on him, attending every game, bragging about his achievements to anyone who would listen. When college application time came around, they were determined that nothing would stand in the way of his success. "Jake has so much potential," Mom would say, her eyes shining with pride. "He could do anything, be anything. We can't let money hold him back." So when Jake was accepted to Ohio State University, there was never any question about whether he would go. The question was how to pay for it. His grades were good but not quite good enough for full scholarships. There were some partial scholarships, some financial aid, but there was still a significant gap between what was covered and what was needed. That's when my parents approached me with what they called an investment in the family's future. "Sarah, you know how proud we are of Jake," Dad had said, settling into the worn recliner that dominated their living room. "And you know how important his education is. We've been looking at the numbers, and we're going to need some help to make this work." They had prepared a presentation of sorts. Mom had written out all the costs on a legal pad, her careful handwriting breaking down tuition, room and board, books, and miscellaneous expenses. The total was staggering, more than I made in 6 months at the insurance office. "We're not asking you to pay for everything," Mom had quickly added, seeing the shock on my face. "We'll take out loans for most of it. But if you could help with just the first year, just to get him started, it would make such a difference." They needed $12,000. $12,000 that represented every penny I had managed to save over the past 3 years, plus money I would have to borrow against my own future. I remember sitting in their living room, the same room where I had spent countless evenings helping Jake with homework while my parents worked extra shifts, the same room where we had celebrated birthdays and holidays and family milestones, and feeling the weight of their expectations. This wasn't really a request. This wasn't really a choice. This was simply what was expected of me. What my role in the family required. "Of course," I had said, just like always, "we're family." Jake's freshman year of college was a revelation for him. He joined a fraternity, made friends, discovered new interests, and seemed to bloom in the freedom of university life. His phone calls home were filled with excitement about classes, professors, social events, and opportunities. He was building a life, creating a future, becoming the person he was meant to be. Meanwhile, I was working double shifts at the insurance office and taking on freelance bookkeeping work on weekends to rebuild my savings account. The $12,000 I had given Jake had wiped out everything I had worked for, but I told myself it was worth it. This was an investment in my brother's future, in the family's success. Someday, when Jake had his degree and his career, he would be able to help our parents, and I wouldn't have to carry the burden alone. But somehow, someday never seemed to arrive. Jake's sophomore year brought new expenses. The dorm was too restrictive. He needed his own apartment. The meal plan wasn't adequate. He needed money for groceries and restaurants. His old laptop was too slow for his engineering classes. He needed a new one. Each request came through our parents, who presented Jake's needs as non-negotiable requirements for his success. "He's doing so well," Mom would say. "His professors love him. He's getting involved in all these great programs. We can't let money derail his progress now." By Jake's junior year, I had developed a system. Every month, I automatically transferred $500 to a savings account designated for family emergencies. It was money I never allowed myself to think about or plan for. Money that existed solely to cushion whatever crisis would inevitably arise. Sometimes it was enough. Sometimes it wasn't, and I had to dip into my personal savings or increasingly put expenses on credit cards. I had stopped thinking about my own future in concrete terms. The graphic design courses I had been taking at community college became an occasional hobby rather than a career path. The idea of starting my own business became a vague someday dream rather than an actionable plan. My own life became a series of reactions to other people's needs, other people's crises, other people's dreams. The romantic relationships I attempted during those years inevitably failed, often for reasons I didn't fully understand at the time. There was Mark, the sweet accountant I dated for 6 months, who broke up with me after I canceled 3 consecutive date nights to deal with family emergencies. There was David, the teacher who seemed genuinely interested in my design work, until he realized that my evenings and weekends were constantly interrupted by phone calls from my parents needing help with one thing or another. "You're always stressed about money," David had said during our breakup conversation. "And you're always dropping everything to run home. I feel like I'm dating your whole family, not just you." I had been hurt and defensive at the time, but looking back, I could see what he meant. I wasn't really available for a relationship because I wasn't really available to myself. Every aspect of my life was contingent on my family's needs, every decision filtered through the question of how it would affect my ability to help them. My friends from high school had scattered to various colleges and careers, and I had lost touch with most of them. The friendships I maintained were surface level, focused on occasional coffee dates or group outings where I could pretend to be carefree and normal. I never talked about my financial situation or the constant pressure I felt to solve everyone else's problems. It was easier to make jokes about being the responsible one, the family fixer, than to admit how trapped and resentful I was beginning to feel. The resentment was the hardest part to acknowledge. Good daughters weren't supposed to resent their families. Good sisters weren't supposed to begrudge their brother's success. Good people weren't supposed to keep mental tallies of every sacrifice they made. But late at night, lying in my small apartment, I would find myself calculating the cost of my generosity. By Jake's senior year, I had given my family over $30,000. $30,000 that could have been a down payment on a house, or seed money for my own business, or simply security for my own future. Instead, it had disappeared into the black hole of their financial mismanagement, their inability to live within their means, their assumption that I would always be there to make up the difference. The worst part was that my help had enabled them to avoid making difficult changes. Dad still worked at the same unreliable job because he knew I would cover the shortfalls. Mom still made impulsive purchases because she knew I would help with the bills. Jake still assumed that money would appear when he needed it because it always had. My generosity had become a crutch that kept them from developing their own financial responsibility. But I didn't know how to stop. The pattern was so ingrained, the expectations so established, that any attempt to change the dynamic felt like betrayal. When I tentatively suggested that maybe Jake could get a part-time job to help with his expenses, I was met with shocked disapproval. "Sarah, Jake is carrying a heavy course load," Mom had said. "Engineering is incredibly demanding. If he has to work, his grades might suffer. And then what good would his degree be?" When I mentioned that I was thinking of taking some design classes myself, possibly working toward a career change, the response was politely dismissive. "That's nice, honey, but you're so good at what you do now. And you're so reliable. Maybe after Jake graduates and gets established, you can think about making changes." Always after, always someday, always when it was convenient for everyone else. Jake's graduation was a bittersweet celebration. I was genuinely proud of him. He had earned his degree with good grades and had already lined up a job with a respected engineering firm. He looked handsome and confident in his cap and gown, surrounded by friends and classmates who were all launching into promising careers. My parents were bursting with pride, taking pictures and bragging to other families about their successful son. I sat in the audience, smiling and applauding but also calculating. 4 years of college. Approximately $50,000 of my money when I added up tuition help, living expenses, emergency funds, and miscellaneous support. $50,000 that had launched Jake into a career that would likely earn him a comfortable 6-figure salary within a few years. After the ceremony, at the family dinner we held at a nice restaurant to celebrate, Jake gave a little speech thanking everyone who had supported him. He thanked Mom and Dad for their love and encouragement. He thanked his professors for their guidance. He thanked his friends for making college memorable. He thanked me last, almost as an afterthought. "And thanks to Sarah for always being there," he had said, raising his glass in my direction. "You're the best big sister anyone could ask for." It was a nice sentiment, but it felt hollow somehow. The best big sister anyone could ask for. Not the person who had funded his education or sacrificed her own dreams to support his or worked double shifts so he could focus on his studies. Just the best big sister, as if my contributions were emotional rather than financial. As if my support had cost me nothing more than good intentions. That night, lying in my apartment, I allowed myself to imagine what my life might have looked like if I had kept that $50,000. I could have finished my design degree. I could have started my own business. I could have traveled or bought a house, or simply had the security of knowing that my future was my own to shape. Instead, I was 26 years old, still living in a studio apartment, still working at a job that paid the bills but offered no real satisfaction or growth potential. Still automatically setting aside money each month for the next family crisis. And there was always a next crisis. Jake's new job came with a good salary, but also with expensive expectations. He needed a professional wardrobe, a reliable car, a nice apartment in the city where he would be working. The transition from college to career required what my parents called startup costs, and naturally, They look to me to help with the initial expenses. It's just until he gets his first few paychecks, Dad explained. You know how these corporate jobs work. They pay well, but there's always a delay between starting and getting that first salary. I gave Jake $3,000 for his apartment deposit and first month's rent. I bought him 2 suits and a week's worth of dress shirts. I paid for the security deposit and first month's insurance on his car. By the time he was established in his new life, I had spent another $8,000 on his startup costs. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jake was now making more money than I had ever dreamed of earning, but I was still the one providing financial support. The pattern had become so automatic, so expected, that it continued even when the original justification, his lack of income, no longer applied. Meanwhile, my parents' financial situation hadn't improved despite years of my assistance. If anything, it seemed to have gotten worse. Dad was still at the same unreliable job, though he was now in his 50s and complaining more frequently about the physical demands of the work. Mom's health issues had multiplied, requiring expensive treatments and medications that their insurance didn't fully cover. They had never learned to budget effectively, never developed the discipline to live within their means, never had to face the real consequences of their financial choices because I was always there to catch them when they fell. My help, intended to be temporary assistance during difficult times, had become a permanent subsidy that enabled their continued poor decisions. I began to feel like I was working 2 jobs, my actual job at the insurance office, and my unpaid job as the family's financial safety net. Every month brought new requests, new emergencies, new needs that somehow became my responsibility to meet. The mental load was exhausting, the financial burden was overwhelming, and the emotional cost was becoming unbearable. But I didn't know how to stop without destroying the relationships that meant everything to me. These weren't strangers or casual friends who were taking advantage of me. These were the people I loved most in the world, the people who had raised me and supported me and been there for me in countless ways throughout my life. How could I turn my back on them when they needed me? The answer to that question would come in the form of a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. I had stopped by my parents' house on a Sunday afternoon planning to drop off some groceries I had picked up for them, and maybe stay for dinner. I had my own key, and I usually just let myself in, but as I approached the front door, I could hear voices from the kitchen. Mom and Dad were talking to someone, their voices carrying the particular tone they used when discussing serious matters. I paused at the door, key in hand, when I heard my name. "Sarah's been so good to us," Mom was saying. "I don't know what we would have done without her all these years. She's a saint," Dad agreed. "Never complains, never asks for anything in return. We're lucky to have a daughter like that." The third voice was unfamiliar. Probably one of their neighbors or friends. "You raised her right. Not many kids would be so generous with their parents." "Well, we've never asked for anything we didn't really need," Mom said, and I could hear the defensive note creeping into her voice. "It's not like we're taking advantage. We always pay her back when we can." This was news to me. In 5 years of regular financial support, I could count on one hand the number of times they had actually repaid money they had borrowed from me. "Of course," the unfamiliar voice said diplomatically. "I'm sure you do what you can. It's just that some people might worry about becoming too dependent on their children's help." There was a pause, and then Dad spoke, his voice taking on a familiar edge of irritation that I recognized from any conversation that questioned his choices or suggested he might be responsible for his own problems. "Look, Sarah makes good money, and she doesn't have a family of her own to support. She lives in that little apartment, drives that old car, doesn't spend money on much of anything. What else is she going to do with her money? At least this way it's helping family. And it's not forever," Mom added. "Jake's getting established now, making good money. Pretty soon he'll be able to help out too, and then Sarah won't have to carry the whole load by herself." "Though to be honest," Dad said, and I could hear him settling back in his chair, "Jake's got his own life to build now. New job, probably want to get married soon, buy a house, start a family. It's natural that his priorities would be different. Sarah's situation is more flexible. More flexible. That's how they saw my life. Not as valuable in its own right, not as worthy of protection and nurturing, but as flexible. Available, expendable. Besides," Mom continued, "Sarah's never seemed interested in marriage or starting a family. She's always been more of a career person, more independent. I think she actually likes being able to help out. It makes her feel needed." I stood frozen on the front porch, listening to my parents discuss my life and my choices, as if I were a character in a story rather than a real person with my own dreams and desires. They had constructed a narrative about who I was and what I wanted that justified their continued dependence on my generosity. In their minds, I was the career-focused single daughter who derived satisfaction from supporting her family, rather than the woman who had repeatedly sacrificed her own goals to meet their needs. The most painful part was realizing that they genuinely believed their own story. They weren't maliciously manipulating me, or consciously taking advantage of my good nature. They had convinced themselves that our arrangement was mutually beneficial, that I was choosing to prioritize family over personal fulfillment, that my financial support was freely given rather than emotionally coerced. But believing their own story didn't make it true, and it didn't change the fact that I had spent the better part of a decade funding their lifestyle while neglecting my own future. I quietly backed away from the door and sat in my car for a long time, trying to process what I had heard. The conversation had revealed something I hadn't wanted to acknowledge. My family didn't see me as a person with my own needs and dreams. They saw me as a resource, a solution to their problems, a safety net that allowed them to take risks without facing consequences. That evening, I called my college friend Emma, who had moved to Chicago and built a successful career in marketing. We had kept in touch sporadically over the years, but I had always been vague about my personal life, deflecting questions about relationships and career goals with jokes about being married to my job. "Emma, can I ask you something?" I said after we had caught up on work and mutual friends. "Of course. What's going on? Do you think I'm the kind of person who doesn't want marriage or a family? Do I seem like someone who's just naturally more focused on career than personal relationships?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Sarah, are you asking me what I think, or are you asking me what other people have told you to think?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" "I mean that every time we've talked over the past few years, you've sounded exhausted and stressed. You work all the time, you never have money to do anything fun, and you always seem to be dealing with some family crisis or another. That doesn't sound like someone who's living the career-focused, independent life she chose. That sounds like someone who's trapped." "I'm not trapped," I said automatically, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew they weren't true. "Sarah, when was the last time you did something just for yourself? When was the last time you made a decision without considering how it would affect your ability to help your family? When was the last time you even thought about what you wanted, independent of what everyone else needed from you?" I couldn't answer any of those questions, which was answer enough. After we hung up, I spent the night making lists. I wrote down every financial contribution I had made to my family over the past 5 years. I calculated the opportunity cost of that money, what it could have earned in investments, what it could have bought for my own life, what it could have funded in terms of education or business development. I wrote down all the career opportunities I had passed up because they would have required time or resources I was already committing to family support. The picture that emerged was devastating. I had essentially been working 2 jobs for years, my actual job, and my unpaid job as the family's financial backstop. I had given up career advancement opportunities, educational goals, relationship possibilities, and personal dreams to maintain a lifestyle for my family that they couldn't afford on their own. And they had come to see this arrangement not as an extraordinary sacrifice on my part, but as the natural order of things. In their minds, I was the successful career woman who chose family obligation over personal fulfillment, rather than the woman who had been gradually giving up pieces of herself to keep everyone else afloat. The next morning, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just a few weeks earlier. I called in sick to work and spent the day researching graphic design programs, career change strategies, and financial planning for small business ownership. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to think seriously about what I wanted my life to look like, independent of my family's needs and expectations. The process was both exhilarating and terrifying. I had spent so long defining myself in relation to other people's needs that I had almost forgotten how to identify my own desires. But as I researched design programs and looked at portfolios of working designers, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: excitement about my own future. I also made another decision that would have been unthinkable even a day earlier. I decided to start saying no. The first test came sooner than I expected. 3 days later, Mom called with her familiar tone of barely controlled panic. "Sarah, honey, I hate to bother you, but we've got a situation. Your father's truck needs a new transmission, and the mechanic says it's going to cost at least $1,500. We just don't have that kind of money right now, and your father needs the truck for work. In the past, I would have automatically started calculating how I could come up with $1,500. I would have looked at my bank balance, considered what expenses I could postpone, maybe put the cost on a credit card if necessary. The family needed help, and helping family was what I did, but this time I took a deep breath and said something I had never said before. That sounds really stressful, Mom. What are you and Dad thinking about doing? There was a pause. Well, we were hoping you might be able to help us out. You know we wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. I understand that it's important, I said. But I'm not going to be able to help with the money. What other options are you considering? The silence that followed was deafening. When Mom finally spoke, her voice had changed completely. Sarah, I don't understand. This is your father's truck. He needs it for work. Without work, he can't support the family. I know it's a difficult situation, I said, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear my own voice. But you and Dad are going to have to figure out another solution. Another solution? Sarah, we don't have another solution. That's why we called you. Maybe Dad could talk to his boss about an advance on his paycheck. Maybe you could apply for a small loan from the bank. Maybe you could ask Uncle Mike if he could lend you the money. Uncle Mike doesn't have that kind of money, Mom said, her voice rising with frustration. And you know the bank won't give us a loan with our credit. Sarah, we're family. Family helps family. There it was. The phrase that had governed my entire adult life. The justification for every sacrifice, the argument that had never failed to make me open my wallet. But this time, instead of feeling the familiar wave of guilt and responsibility, I felt something different. I felt anger. Mom, I have been helping family for 10 years. I have given you and Dad and Jake tens of thousands of dollars. I have paid for emergencies and non-emergencies and things that turned out not to be emergencies at all. I have worked extra shifts and taken on extra jobs and put my own goals on hold so that everyone else in this family could pursue their dreams. I have been helping family. Now it's time for family to help themselves. Sarah Elizabeth, I cannot believe you're talking to me this way. After everything your father and I have done for you, after all the sacrifices we've made raising you and Jake, this is how you repay us, how I repay you. The anger was building now. Years of suppressed resentment finally finding its voice. Mom, I have been repaying you for 10 years. I have been repaying you to the tune of thousands of dollars a year. I have been repaying you by giving up my own dreams and goals and future so that you could avoid dealing with your financial problems. That's not fair, Sarah. We never asked you to give up your dreams. You didn't have to ask. Every time you called with an emergency, every time you needed money for something that wasn't really an emergency, every time you made it clear that the family's needs came before my own, you were asking me to give up my dreams. And I did it over and over again, because I thought that's what love meant. Sarah, you're being very hurtful right now. I think you need to calm down and think about what you're saying. I am calm, Mom, and I've been thinking about the fact that Jake makes more money than I do now, but I'm still the one who gets called when there's a financial emergency. I've been thinking about the fact that you and Dad have never once asked me what I want for my own life, but you've never hesitated to ask me to sacrifice for yours. I've been thinking about the conversation you had last week where you told your friend that my life is more flexible than Jake's, as if my dreams and goals don't matter as much as his. Another silence, longer this time. When Mom spoke again, her voice was cold. I don't know what's gotten into you, Sarah, but this isn't like you. You're not usually so selfish. You're right, Mom. I haven't been selfish. I've been the opposite of selfish. I've been so focused on everyone else's needs that I forgot I had needs of my own. But I'm done being that person. So you're just going to turn your back on your family? I'm not turning my back on you. I'm just not going to be your automatic solution to every financial problem anymore. You and Dad are adults. You need to figure out how to handle your own financial emergencies. And what if we can't? What if your father loses his job because he can't get to work? Then you'll figure something else out, just like millions of other people do when they have financial problems. I could hear Mom crying now, and the sound nearly broke my resolve. I had never made my mother cry. I had never been the source of her pain rather than the solution to it. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to take it back, to apologize, to offer to help after all. But I forced myself to remember the conversation I had overheard, the casual way they had dismissed my dreams and goals as less important than Jake's, the assumption that I would always be available to solve their problems because my life was more flexible. Mom, I love you and Dad, and I want to have a relationship with you. But it has to be a different kind of relationship. It can't be based on me giving you money every time you need it. I don't understand why you're doing this, Sarah. We've never done anything but love you and support you. Supporting me would mean encouraging me to pursue my own goals and dreams. It would mean celebrating my successes and helping me through my own difficult times. It would mean treating my needs as just as important as Jake's. That's not what's been happening. Sarah, I think you're having some kind of breakdown or something. This isn't like you at all. Maybe you should talk to someone, get some help. You're right, Mom. I should talk to someone. I should get some help figuring out how to have healthy relationships instead of relationships based on financial obligation. I can't believe you think our relationship is unhealthy. I can't believe you think we've been taking advantage of you. Mom, in the past 5 years, I have given this family over $50,000. $50,000 of my own money, earned from my own work, that I could have used for my own education, my own business, my own future. And not once in those 5 years has anyone in this family asked me what I wanted for myself or encouraged me to invest in my own dreams. If that's not taking advantage, I don't know what is. There was a long pause, and when Mom spoke again, her voice was different. Smaller, somehow. I had no idea it was that much money. It was that much money. And it was time and energy and opportunities I gave up because I was always available to solve everyone else's problems. Sarah, we never meant for things to get so out of hand. We just, when you're in crisis mode all the time, when you're just trying to keep your head above water, you don't think about the big picture. You just think about getting through the next emergency. I understand that, Mom. But I can't keep being the one who prevents you from having to deal with the consequences of living in crisis mode all the time. You and Dad need to figure out how to manage your finances without counting on me to make up the difference. I don't know if we can do that, Sarah. We've gotten so used to knowing you're there if we need help. You're going to have to learn, just like I'm going to have to learn how to have relationships that aren't based on me giving money to people I love. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment and shook for about 20 minutes. I had never spoken to my mother that way. I had never refused to help with a family emergency. I had never put my own needs ahead of theirs so explicitly and unapologetically. But I had also never felt so clear about what I needed to do. The next few weeks were brutal. Mom called several times, alternating between tearful guilt trips and angry accusations. Dad called to tell me how disappointed he was in my selfishness. Jake called to ask what was wrong with me, why I was being so mean to our parents over money. It's just $1,500, Sarah, Jake said during one particularly painful conversation. You make good money. It's not like they're asking you to buy them a house. Jake, it's not about the $1,500. It's about the pattern. It's about the fact that I've been giving money to this family for 10 years, and now that you're making more money than I am, you've never once been asked to help. That's different. I'm just getting started in my career. I have student loans to pay off, and I'm trying to save for a house. I had student loans too, Jake. I had goals and dreams too. But I gave those up to help pay for your education and support.
Nobody asked you to do that, Sarah. Didn't they? Jake, every time there was a financial crisis, who got the phone call? Every time someone needed money for something, who was expected to provide it? Nobody had to ask explicitly because it was understood that I was the one who would handle it. But that was your choice, was it? When I was 16 and gave up my car fund to help with the mortgage, was that really my choice? When I was 18 and used my college savings to pay for your Washington, D.C. trip, was that my choice? When I was 20 and spent my entire inheritance from Grandma on your first year of college tuition, was that my choice? Or was that what was expected of me because I was the responsible one, the one who could be counted on to sacrifice for the family? There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. Finally, Jake spoke, his voice quieter than before. I never thought about it that way. I know you didn't, none of you did, because it was easier to see my help as freely given rather than to acknowledge what it was costing me. Sarah, I'm sorry. I really am. I had no idea you felt this way. I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty, Jake. I'm telling you because I need you to understand why I can't keep doing this. I'm 28 years old, and I've spent my entire adult life putting everyone else's needs first. I need to start living my own life. What can I do? How can I help? You can support me when I set boundaries with Mom and Dad. You can start contributing to family emergencies instead of assuming I'll handle them. And you can stop treating my help like it's unlimited and free. I can do that. I want to do that. That conversation with Jake was the first sign that maybe, just maybe, my family could learn to see me as something other than their financial safety net. But it would take much more than one conversation to change patterns that had been established over a decade. The real test came 2 months later, when Dad's truck finally broke down completely. The transmission repair they had needed my help with had been postponed, and now the entire vehicle was beyond saving. Dad needed a car to get to work, and they needed it immediately. This time, the phone call came from Jake. "Sarah, I know you said you weren't going to help with money anymore, but this is really serious. Dad's going to lose his job if he can't get to work, and they can't afford a car payment. What are you going to do to help?" I asked. "Me, Sarah, I'm still paying off student loans, and I'm trying to save for a house. My finances are really tight right now." "Jake, you make $60,000 a year. I make $35,000. If your finances are too tight to help with a family emergency, how do you think mine are? But you don't have student loans." "I don't have student loans because I didn't go to college. I didn't go to college because I spent my college fund helping the family. I spent my 20s working dead-end jobs instead of building a career because I was always available to handle family crises. So no, I don't have student loans, but I also don't have the earning potential that comes with a college degree." "Sarah, I never realized." "I know you didn't, but now you do. So what are you going to do to help Mom and Dad with this situation?" There was a long pause. "I guess I could lend them some money for a down payment on a used car. That would be a good start, but I can't afford to just give them the money. I'd need them to pay me back. Jake, I have given this family over $60,000 in the past 10 years. $60,000 that was never paid back, never even acknowledged as a loan rather than a gift. If you're worried about getting paid back, maybe you should think about why that is." That conversation marked a turning point in my relationship with Jake. For the first time, he was being asked to contribute financially to a family crisis, and he was experiencing the same anxiety and reluctance that I had been suppressing for years. He was learning what it felt like to have his own financial goals threatened by family obligations. Meanwhile, my parents were struggling to adjust to their new reality. Without my automatic financial support, they were forced to confront the actual state of their finances, and it wasn't pretty. They had been living beyond their means for years, using my contributions to bridge the gap between their income and their expenses. Now, with that safety net removed, they had to make some difficult choices. Dad finally left his unreliable job at the plant and found steadier work at a hardware store. The pay was lower, but it was consistent, and it came with better benefits. Mom took on more hours at her part-time job despite her back problems. They sold some furniture and household items they didn't really need. They canceled their cable subscription and found cheaper alternatives for entertainment. It was painful to watch them struggle, but it was also enlightening. These were changes they could have made years earlier, changes that would have eliminated the need for most of my financial assistance. But as long as I was available to cover their shortfalls, there had been no incentive to make those changes. My own life began to change as well. Without the constant drain of family financial emergencies, I was able to start rebuilding my savings account. I enrolled in a graphic design program at the community college, something I had been putting off for years. I began working on a portfolio and researching what it would take to start my own design business. The most surprising change was in my dating life. For the first time in years, I was able to be fully present in relationships, instead of constantly distracted by family crises. I met Marcus at a coffee shop near the college, where we were both working on laptops during our lunch breaks. He was a freelance writer working on building his own business, and we bonded over the challenges of pursuing creative careers while maintaining financial stability. "It's funny," Marcus said during one of our early dates. "You're the first person I've met who really understands the balance between following your dreams and being practical about money." I almost laughed. 6 months earlier, I had been so consumed by other people's financial problems that I barely remembered I had dreams of my own. Now, for the first time in my adult life, I was able to prioritize my own goals and future. But the family drama was far from over. The more independent I became, the more desperate my parents seemed to become about pulling me back into my old role. The guilt trips intensified, the emotional manipulation became more sophisticated, and the crises seemed to multiply. There was the emergency dental work that Mom needed, which somehow required not just help with the medical bills, but also money for prescription medications, special foods, and time off work. There was the car accident that wasn't really Dad's fault, but insurance wouldn't cover everything, and they needed help with the deductible and rental car fees. There was Jake's graduation gift request. He wanted to take a trip to Europe to celebrate finishing college, and wouldn't it be nice if the whole family could contribute? Each crisis came with increasingly elaborate justifications for why I should help. I wasn't just being asked to contribute money. I was being asked to prove my love, demonstrate my family loyalty, and show that I hadn't been corrupted by selfish influences. "I don't know what's happened to you, Sarah," Mom said during one particularly difficult phone call. "You used to be such a caring, generous person, and now you've become so cold and calculating about everything." "I'm not cold, Mom. I'm just not available to solve every problem with my checkbook anymore. But we're family. Family is supposed to be there for each other. I am here for you. I call you every week. I visit when I can. I offer emotional support and practical advice. What I don't offer anymore is automatic financial assistance. Money isn't the only way to help, but it's the way that actually solves problems. Emotional support doesn't pay bills. Maybe not, but my money hasn't actually solved your financial problems either. It's just postponed them. You and Dad have the same money management issues now that you had 10 years ago, despite all the help I've given you over the years. That's not true. Mom, you're calling me about an emergency dental bill. How is this different from the emergency car repair I helped with last year, or the emergency house repair I helped with the year before that? These aren't unusual, unpredictable expenses. These are normal life expenses that you haven't planned for because you've gotten used to me planning for them. Sarah, I can't believe you're being so heartless about your mother's dental problems." "I'm not being heartless. I'm being realistic. You knew you needed dental work. You've known for months. Instead of saving money or researching payment plans or talking to the dentist about financing options, you waited until it became an emergency and then called me. That's not planning, that's enabling. I shouldn't have to choose between getting medical care and asking my daughter for help. You're not choosing between medical care and asking me for help. You're choosing between planning ahead for predictable expenses and expecting me to cover them when they become crises." These conversations were exhausting, but they were also clarifying. I was beginning to see the patterns that had governed our family dynamics for years, patterns I had been too close to recognize when I was in the middle of them. My parents had developed a crisis management approach to finances that relied on external rescue rather than internal planning. They had never learned to budget effectively, save for emergencies, or make difficult choices about spending because they had never had to face the full consequences of their financial decisions. Meanwhile, I had developed a rescuer complex that made me feel valuable and needed, but also prevented me from building my own life. I had confused being needed with being loved, and I had measured my worth by my ability to solve other people's problems. Breaking these patterns required more than just setting financial boundaries. It required fundamentally changing how I saw myself and my role in the family. I had to learn to tolerate other people's disappointment and disapproval. I had to learn to value my own needs and goals as much as I valued other people's. I had to learn to say no without providing detailed justifications or feeling guilty about my choices. The process was made more difficult by the fact that my extended family had opinions about my new boundaries. Aunts and uncles, who had heard my parents' version of events, began calling to express their concern about my selfishness. Cousins who had never been asked to contribute to family emergencies felt free to offer advice about my obligations to my parents. "Sarah, I heard about your parents' situation," my Aunt Carol said during a family barbecue. "I can't believe you're not helping them. What's gotten into you?" "Aunt Carol, I've been helping them for 10 years. I've given them tens of thousands of dollars over the years. I'm not abandoning them. I'm just not solving their financial problems for them anymore. But they're your parents. You owe them for everything they did for you growing up. I don't owe them my entire adult life. I don't owe them my financial future. I don't owe them unlimited access to my bank account. That's a very selfish way to look at it. Maybe, but I spent my 20s being completely unselfish, and all it did was enable everyone else to avoid taking responsibility for their own lives. Sometimes a little selfishness is necessary for everyone's good." These family conversations were painful, but they also helped me understand how deeply ingrained the dysfunction was. The entire extended family had come to see my financial support as normal and expected. They had never questioned whether it was fair or sustainable for one person to carry the financial burden for everyone else. More troubling, they had never wondered what the constant financial pressure was doing to me. No one had ever asked whether I was happy, whether I felt fulfilled, whether I had goals and dreams of my own. I had been so thoroughly cast in the role of the family caretaker that my own needs and desires had become invisible, even to myself. The breakthrough came during a conversation with my therapist, Drive Martinez, about 6 months after I had started setting boundaries with my family. Sarah, you've talked a lot about feeling guilty for not helping your family financially anymore. But I'm curious about something else. How do you feel about the way your family has responded to your boundaries? What do you mean? I mean that you've been in therapy for months, you've been working hard to build a healthier relationship with your family, and you've been very clear about your needs and boundaries. How has your family responded to that growth? I thought about it for a moment. They've been angry, mostly, and hurt. They keep trying to convince me to go back to the way things were. Have any of them expressed interest in understanding your perspective? Have any of them asked about your goals or your feelings? Have any of them shown curiosity about why you needed to make these changes? The question hit me like a physical blow. In 6 months of difficult conversations, boundary setting, and family conflict, not one person in my family had asked me how I was feeling. Not one person had expressed interest in understanding my point of view. Not one person had shown any curiosity about my goals, my dreams, my needs, or my well-being. Their entire focus had been on getting me to return to my old role as the family's financial safety net. They had shown no interest in me as a person, only in me as a resource. No, I said quietly. No one has asked me any of those questions. What does that tell you about how your family sees you? It tells me that they don't see me as a person with my own needs and feelings. They see me as a function, a role, a solution to their problems. And how does that make you feel? Sad and angry, and relieved that I finally understand what's been happening all these years. That conversation marked the beginning of a new phase in my healing process. I stopped trying to help my family understand my perspective and started focusing on building a life that reflected my own values and priorities. I stopped feeling guilty about their disapproval and started feeling proud of my courage in changing dysfunctional patterns. I threw myself into my graphic design studies with an enthusiasm I hadn't felt since high school. I discovered that I had a natural talent for visual communication and a genuine passion for helping small businesses develop their brand identity. I started taking on freelance projects, building a portfolio, and networking with other designers and entrepreneurs. My relationship with Marcus deepened as well. Unlike my previous relationships, which had been constantly interrupted by family crises, this one was allowed to develop naturally. Marcus was supportive of my career goals and encouraging about my creative work. More importantly, he saw me as a complete person with my own dreams and aspirations, not just as someone who was available to help others. "You know what I love about you," Marcus said one evening as we were working on our respective projects at my kitchen table. "You're so focused and determined. When you decide you want something, you make it happen." I looked up from the logo design I was working on, surprised by his observation. "I don't feel very focused or determined. I feel like I'm just figuring things out as I go." But that's exactly what I mean. A year ago, you were working a job you didn't love and spending all your free time dealing with other people's problems. Now you're building a career you're passionate about and creating a life that's actually yours. That takes incredible focus and determination. It was the first time anyone had ever described me as focused and determined. My family had always seen me as generous and helpful, but never as someone with her own agenda, her own goals, her own fierce commitment to building something meaningful. As my design business began to grow, I found myself working longer hours and earning more money than I ever had at the insurance office. But unlike my previous work, this felt purposeful and energizing. I was building something that was mine, creating value in the world and developing skills that would serve me for the rest of my career. The financial independence was intoxicating. For the first time in my adult life, I was earning money that I could spend or save according to my own priorities. I opened a retirement account and started making regular contributions. I built an emergency fund that was actually for my own emergencies. I even started planning for things I had never dared to dream about before, like buying a house or taking a real vacation. But the most profound change was in how I saw myself. I was no longer the family caretaker. the person whose value came from her willingness to sacrifice for others. I was an entrepreneur, a creative professional, a woman building her own life according to her own vision. This transformation didn't go unnoticed by my family, but their response was not what I had hoped for. Instead of celebrating my success or expressing pride in my achievements, they seemed threatened by my independence. "Sarah's gotten too big for her britches," I overheard Dad saying to Mom during a family gathering. "All this business stuff has gone to her head. She thinks she's too good for us now." "I don't understand why she had to start her own business anyway," Mom replied. "She had a perfectly good job at the insurance office. Now she's working all the time, and she's never available when we need her. Never available when we need her." That phrase crystallized everything that was wrong with our family dynamic. They didn't see my career success as a positive development in my life. They saw it as a threat to their access to my resources. The final test of my new boundaries came almost exactly 1 year after I had refused to help with Dad's truck repair. Jake called me on a Thursday evening, his voice tight with anxiety. "Sarah, we have a real emergency this time. Mom's in the hospital. She had chest pains at work, and they think she might have had a heart attack." My blood ran cold. "Is she okay? What hospital is she at?" "She's at Memorial. They're running tests now." "But Sarah, the insurance isn't going to cover everything, and they're talking about needing surgery. We're looking at thousands of dollars in medical bills." This was different. This wasn't a manufactured crisis or a predictable expense that had been ignored until it became an emergency. This was a genuine medical emergency. The kind of situation that could bankrupt a family even with insurance. "I'll be right there," I said, grabbing my keys and heading for the door. At the hospital, I found Dad and Jake in the waiting room, both of them looking older and more fragile than I had ever seen them. Dad's hands were shaking as he filled out insurance paperwork, and Jake was pacing the small room like a caged animal. "How is she?" I asked, sitting down beside Dad. "They don't know yet. They're doing some kind of test where they put dye in her arteries to see if there are blockages. If there are, she might need surgery." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of the situation settling over us. This wasn't about money or boundaries or family dynamics. This was about Mom's life, her health, her future. "Dad, what did the doctor say about the insurance coverage?" "Well, the emergency room visit is covered, and most of the tests. But if she needs surgery, there's a deductible and co-insurance that could add up to $10,000 or $15,000. And if she can't work for a while during recovery, we'll lose her income too." I looked at my father, really looked at him, for the first time in months. He was 62 years old, with gray hair and deep lines around his eyes. He had worked physical jobs his entire life, and the strain was showing. He was facing the possibility of losing his wife and financial ruin at the same time. "What can I do to help?" I asked. Dad looked up from his paperwork, surprise flickering across his face. "Sarah, I thought you said you weren't going to help with money anymore." "This isn't about our financial patterns or enabling or any of that stuff. This is about Mom's health. This is a real emergency, but the money— Dad, I'm not going to let Mom avoid medical treatment because of money. We'll figure out the financial part." Jake stopped pacing and looked at me. "Sarah, are you sure? I mean, after everything that's happened." "Jake, I set boundaries around manufactured crises and predictable expenses that weren't being planned for. I didn't set boundaries around genuine emergencies that could threaten someone's life." Over the next several hours, we learned that Mom had indeed had a mild heart attack, and she would need surgery to clear blocked arteries. The procedure was scheduled for the following week, and the recovery would take several months. As we began to navigate the complex world of medical insurance, hospital billing, and treatment options, something unexpected happened. For the first time in years, my family began treating me as a partner rather than a resource. Dad asked for my opinion about different treatment options and helped me understand the insurance paperwork. Jake took time off work to be at the hospital and started researching recovery resources and support services. Mom, when she was awake and alert, thanked me for being there, but didn't assume that I would handle everything by myself. "Sarah, I want you to know that I've been thinking about our conversations over the past year," Mom said during one of my visits. "I know you felt like we were taking advantage of you, and I want you to know that wasn't our intention." "I know it wasn't, Mom. I know you and Dad love me and weren't trying to hurt me. But we did hurt you, didn't we? We got so used to leaning on you that we forgot you had your own life to live. Yeah, you did hurt me. But I let it happen because I didn't know how to say no. I didn't know how to value my own needs as much as I valued yours. I'm proud of you for learning how to do that. I'm proud of the business you've built and the life you're creating for yourself. I should have said that a long time ago. It was the first time in my adult life that my mother had expressed pride in my independent achievements rather than my willingness to sacrifice for the family. The medical crisis brought our family together in a way that years of manufactured emergencies never had. We worked as a team to navigate Mom's treatment and recovery. Jake and I split the cost of the medical bills that insurance didn't cover. Dad took on extra responsibilities at home and learned to manage Mom's medications and physical therapy appointments. Mom, during her recovery, began to take a more active role in managing the family's finances. She set up a budget, started saving for future medical expenses, and began researching ways to reduce their monthly expenses. For the first time in years, she was taking ownership of their financial situation rather than waiting for the next crisis to resolve itself. 6 months after Mom's surgery, our family dynamics had changed in ways I never could have predicted. Jake had become more involved in helping our parents, not just financially, but emotionally and practically. He visited regularly, helped with household projects, and took on some of the caregiving responsibilities that had previously fallen entirely on my shoulders. Mom and Dad had developed new financial habits and learned to plan for predictable expenses rather than treating everything as an emergency. They had also begun to see me as a person with my own life and goals, rather than just as a resource for solving their problems. Most importantly, they had learned to be proud of my independence, rather than threatened by it. "Sarah, we want to take you and Marcus out to dinner to celebrate your business anniversary," Dad said during one of our weekly phone calls. "We're so proud of what you've built." "Thanks, Dad. That means a lot to me. We should have been supporting your dreams all along instead of expecting you to support ours. We're all learning, Dad. We're all figuring out how to be a healthier family." As I hung up the phone, I thought about how far we had all come. My parents had learned to take responsibility for their own lives and to value my independence. Jake had learned to be a contributing member of the family rather than just a beneficiary. And I had learned that love doesn't require self-sacrifice, that boundaries are necessary for healthy relationships, and that my dreams and goals are worth protecting. But the most important lesson I had learned was about the difference between genuine emergencies and manufactured crises. When my family faced a real emergency, Mom's heart attack, we had all risen to the occasion and worked together as a team. But when they manufactured crises out of poor planning and financial irresponsibility, the only result was dysfunction and resentment. The difference wasn't in the amount of money involved or the severity of the situation. The difference was in whether the crisis was the result of circumstances beyond anyone's control or the result of choices that could have been made differently. My relationship with Marcus had also grown stronger throughout this process. He had supported me through the difficult family conversations, celebrated my business successes, and helped me maintain perspective during the most challenging moments. "You know what I admire most about how you handled your family situation?" Marcus said one evening as we were cooking dinner together in my new apartment, a larger place I had been able to afford thanks to my growing business. "What's that? You figured out how to set boundaries without cutting people off. You found a way to love your family without enabling them. That's really hard to do. It didn't feel like love at the time. It felt like abandonment. But it wasn't abandonment. It was tough love. You cared about them enough to stop enabling their dysfunction, even when it made you the bad guy. I guess I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone else's self-destruction. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is refuse to sacrifice your own life for someone else's poor choices." 2 years after I had first refused to help with Dad's truck repair, I was living a life I couldn't have imagined when I was caught in the cycle of family financial crises. My design business was thriving, with a steady stream of clients and more work than I could handle. I had moved into a beautiful one-bedroom apartment with a dedicated office space and enough room to entertain friends and family. Marcus and I had been talking about moving in together, and for the first time in my life, I was in a relationship with someone who saw me as an equal partner rather than a caretaker or a resource. We were planning a future together based on mutual support and shared goals rather than one-sided sacrifice. My relationship with my family had evolved into something healthier and more sustainable. We talked regularly, visited each other often, and genuinely enjoyed each other's company. But we also respected each other's boundaries and autonomy. When they had problems, they worked together to solve them rather than automatically turning to me for rescue. When I had challenges with my business or personal life, they offered emotional support and practical advice, rather than expecting me to handle everything alone. Most importantly, they had learned to see my success as a source of family pride, rather than a threat to their access to my resources. They bragged about my business to their friends, referred potential clients to me, and celebrated my achievements with genuine enthusiasm. The transformation hadn't been easy or quick. It had required difficult conversations, hurt feelings, and periods of tension and distance, but ultimately it had resulted in relationships that were based on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than obligation and guilt. As I sat in my office one evening working on a particularly challenging logo design for a new client, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. I had learned that I was not responsible for fixing other people's lives, but I was responsible for building my own. I had learned that love doesn't require self-sacrifice, that boundaries are necessary for healthy relationships, and that my dreams and goals were worth protecting. Most importantly, I had learned that I was worth more than I had ever believed, worth more than being the family ATM, worth more than living paycheck to paycheck while funding other people's choices, worth more than making myself small so others could feel bigger. The girl who had given away $60,000 and called it love was gone. In her place was a woman who understood the difference between generosity and enabling, between family loyalty and self-sacrifice, between love and transaction. And for the first time in my adult life, I was building something beautiful.